Hello. Please take your seat. We will begin in 5 minutes. Uh, so now I'd like to call Professor Nivedita Menon, Professor Simona Sawhney, Dr. Pradeep Shinde, and Dr. Brahma Prakash, and Dr. Samrat Chaudhary to please come on the stage. Good evening, everyone. I am Nitish, and on behalf of JNU Academic, I welcome you all to today's symposium. Today's symposium is centered on the book Body on the Barricades: Life, Art, and Resistance in Contemporary India, authored by Dr. Brahma Prakash. Before beginning the discussion, let me briefly introduce the theme, panelists, and the format of today's session. JNU Academic is an entirely student-driven open forum. The foundational principle of the forum is to enrich and enliven possibilities of democratic and civil discourse inside the campus on issues that are of social relevance. Knowing there is not much institutional support for academic activities nowadays, we are entirely dependent on you for all types of financial needs. Kindly contribute as much as you can so we can continue organizing talks, conferences, and discussions such as this. The body is arranged, controlled, and curtailed by the authoritarian regime in such a way that it suits its ideologies and ambitions. COVID-19 pandemic is a recent example that shows us how the right-wing regime, not only in India but across the world, turned it into an opportunity to extend its power and popularity. The book in discussion today is about authoritarianism, its culture of curtailment, and the struggle against it. The author says, "Yes, I feel I cannot breathe, therefore I write. Whenever I feel suffocated, I write. Sometimes I write to write, sometimes I write to play. It reminds me of a poem by Charles Bukowski. He writes, if it does not come bursting out of you, in spite of everything, don't do it. Unless it comes and asks out of your heart and your mind and your mouth and your gut, don't do it. Any sensitive human cannot remain unsoft and untouched by the various incidents which have become routine practices of this authoritarian regime. The author narrates the story of those bodies attacked in the Una incident, the Hathras gang rape case, the farmers' protest, the Sainbag protest, and in routine surveillance of artists, poets, writers, and academicians. A point to note here is that Dr. Prakash writes about these curtailments imposed on life, art, and freedom in contemporary India, not as a critique outside, but as part of this suffocating structure of the various forms of barricading. With this, I would like to briefly introduce the panelists of today's session. Dr. Brahma Prakash is a writer, cultural theorist, and an assistant professor of theatre and performance studies at the School of Arts and Aesthetics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Cultural Labor, Conceptualizing the Folk Performance in India. He received the prestigious Dwight Conquergood Award from Performance Studies International in 2013. He was a fellow at the Center for the Research in the Arts, Social Sciences and Humanities at Cambridge University, United Kingdom, and the South Asia Institute at Heidelberg University, Germany. He is currently working on the idea of cultural justice in India and the changing context of the local harvest festivals in eastern India. His articles have appeared in leading journals and edited volumes, including Asian Theatre Journal, Contemporary Theatre Review, EPW, Performance Research, and Authors. The first discussant of today's symposium is Dr. Pradeep Kumar Sinde. He is a social anthropologist and assistant professor at the Center for Informal Sector and Labor Studies at the School of Social Sciences at JNU. He did his studies at TASTE and PhD from the London School of Economics. His interest in the questions of work, mobility, labor, and denotified tribe. Along with this, he has also explored the concepts of caste, kinship, gender, and the state in the ethnographic research. In many of his research publications, he has examined the question of collective identification in relation to bureaucracy, denotified tribes, and slum dwellers communities at large. He has been a visiting teaching fellow at the International Center for Development and Decent Work at Kassel University and Humboldt University in Germany. Very few people know that he is also a poet, avid literature lover, and a fan of B.S. Nepal. Besides being a great ethnographer, his articles have appeared in leading journals of social sciences, including the Journal of South Asian Studies, EPW, and other edited volumes. We welcome you, sir. Our second discussant is Professor Simona Soni. She teaches in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Delhi. She is interested in literary theory, political theory, and feminist thought. She has published some work on Sanskrit and Hindi texts, as well as on modern Indian political thought. Most recently, she published a translation of Yashpal's 1941 novel, Dada Comrade, and co-edited a collection of essays on Yashpal's work titled Yashpal, Gender and Revolutionary Thought, which is forthcoming. We welcome you, ma'am, here. Our last discussion of today's symposium is Professor Nivedita Menon. She is a professor at Center for Comparative Politics and Political Theory, School of International Studies, JNU. Before moving to JNU in 2009, she taught at Lady Sri Ram College for 15 years and the Political Science Department at Delhi University for 7 years. Her research areas include feminist theory, political theory, and Indian politics. She has published several books such as Recovering Subversion, Feminist Politics, Beyond the Law, and Seeing Like a Feminist. We welcome you, ma'am, here. And to chair the session, we have with us Dr. Samrat Chaudhary. He teaches at the School of Arts and Statics, JNU. His research areas include theatre histories, performance theory, cultural studies, philosophy, and politics. He is the author of the book Theatre Number Event, Three Studies on the Relationship Between Sovereignty, Power, Truth, Ambedkar and Other Immortals, an Untouchable Research Program, and Now It's Come to Distances, Notes on Signbar and Coronavirus, Association and Isolation. We welcome you, ourselves. We welcome you here. The format of the discussion is as follows. The book's author will briefly explain the book in 5 minutes to speak, followed by his discussion, speaking for about 10 to 12 minutes each. The author shall then reply to the discussion in brief. After that, we open up the discussion for the audience. Now, I would like to call upon Professor Urmimala Sarkar Munshi, who is currently Professor and Dean of the School of Arts and Aesthetics, to give the welcome address. Without her help and cooperation, today's event would not have been possible.
Hello everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you for the discussion on Body on the Barricade, Life, Art and Resistance in Contemporary India. Reading about hope, empathy, anger and resolve at a time that tries to make despair your faithful companion is indeed a privilege. And it has been wonderful to read this book, even before it became a book. Because in snippets, in small writings, in different kinds of articles were published elsewhere, in other small reportages, it has turned into, through edits, it has turned into a book, and it's a pure pleasure. It's really proud moment for us. So, with these words, I begin this session and I welcome all the great people who have come here. We are waiting to listen to you.
Now, I'd like to call upon Purvasa Sarkar, publisher the lecturer, to come on the stage. Okay, so you can sit here, the seats are vacant. Those who are actually. Okay, now I will now request the dean, the publisher of the lecture, the chair, and the panelists to formally launch the book.
So, I would request all of you to open it up. Open it up. Yes. Yeah. Show more the copyright.
I think this is my copy.
Now I hand over to Professor Somrat Chaudhary to continue today's proceedings.
Is it? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. It is an indescribable honor and pleasure to do this and be part of this discussion. So, before the several discussants start speaking, and I really look forward to their remarks on the book, let me just do this. Let me just literally speak aloud. The last paragraph of this book, it's epic. With my eyes, I cannot actually read them out, but I sort of tried to learn them out last night. So I hope I got them right. But there are quite some lines. I just thought I would like to, speak them aloud. So, it goes something like this. The very last 4 lines of the book. We are not making an exit. This is not the end. We are only taking a pause. We will meet again at the barricades in words of life and freedom. There's a popular saying that the barricade closes streets but opens ways. So what makes it possible for an author to end a book with these endless lines, these infinite utterances? That to me was something quite shattering, this question. So even if one is a kind of orderly, orthodox, classical reader going from the first page to the last, even then, one really sort of like a suspense thriller. One wants to read this book to see how does one reach such a moment of elevated, infinite hope and affirmation. When one also realizes, as one reads the book, that it's a book about the most distressing, the most profoundly disturbing and oppressive realities that not just surround us, but actually wound us and kill us, one has to say. Even after that, how does a book reach this moment of something which is not an exit, like the author says, but something which is liberating, something which in its conclusion does not end, and in its endlessness concludes the book, as it were. So in a sense, one can also do the other thing, which is to read the book backwards. And what happened at a certain moment in contemporary Indian history that it became necessary for Brahma Prakash to put pen to paper and write these extremely concrete, cogent, precise, analytical almost, accounts of everything that is happening with us and to us through history, and yet be able to write something which is on the level of writing itself much more and much else than an account, than a chronicle. So in that sense, a book more than a book. This is what I would like to call to affirm not just the right to expression and right to tell things as they are, but also the right to write itself. So, you could read the book, it seems to me, in so many ways, from beginning to end, from the end to sort of backwards, to that point where such a book becomes necessary. And also from any other point, in the middle, as it were, always in the middle. And I don't mean this in some vague poetic way. If you notice in the lines that I spoke out, there is a subject, no? And he says, we are not making an exit. We are going to meet on the barricades. And so on. Then what does this mean? Is this book written in the name of a collective sort of subject of resistance, a political subject, the way you think about it, a revolutionary subject? Why not? But then when you read the book, you see that actually the speaking subject, the one who speaks in this book and through this book, actually occupies so many complex and different positions. And I'm sure the panelists are going to talk about that, to talk through those different positions. So for instance, there is this rousing affirmative we at the end, but there's also the concrete chronicling I, the author. But there's also something in between, which is quite fascinating to me, towards the last part of this book, just before the epilogue of text on mourning, a really moving text on mourning and death. There's also a narrator. The author writes not in the first person anymore, that I am saying this around. He's suddenly speaking, indicating and reporting something like a narrator. The narrator does this. And the narrator does not believe in those who say everything is ending. The narrator is a figure of laughter. The narrator laughs at those who merely announce a catastrophe at the ending of everything, the end of everything. Who's this narrator? That's another absolutely fascinating, enigmatic position from where this book speaks. And then there's also the very direct assault on the you who suddenly now says everything is ending. Where were you when the UFEA and the neoliberal policies were being enunciated and created? So to me, this is something which is such a space of play. And that's why this book is also a work of creation, a work of many persona and masks. The we, the I, the he, the narrator. It's a book of theatricality, in other words. But the theatricality which has been mobilized in the most difficult historical contemporary situation. It's a book which is situated, and yet it defies the sort of constriction of the situation by creating a kind of a play space out of it. But it played back to something else, which is a serious reflection on the possibilities of resistance. So that's why the figure, the metaphor, and the reality of the barricade becomes such not just an important one, also something which, like I said, something which becomes a really a point of collective solidarity. People come together on the barricade, not just to fight the oppressor, but also think the oppression. The barricade becomes a place of investigation, collective investigation. That's the last point before I hand over to the speakers. And this is a book which I call a book from the space of point of view of a kind of public intellectuality. Not the accepted figure of the public intellectual, which I'm afraid often degenerates into some sort of celebrity status. And anyway, there are very few of them. But from something else, something more fundamental, which is the space of public intellectuality, which basically consists of the axiom, the fundamental assertion that everyone thinks. Which is to say, thinking is not the prerogative of any one section of society, whichever that section might be. So it is that axiom which, in a sense, brings back the specificity of the author's voice or the other voices in the book, that collective possibility of thinking. So in a sense, it is the space of public intellectuality which creates the new public intellectual, as it were, among us. It's a privilege to sit with him, Brahma Prakash. But only if one lives in that very immersion, and Brahma Prakash loves this word immersion, I know that, the immersive reality which makes possible a kind of epic rather than a mere historical spirit. So in that epic spirit he writes, and yet he is nothing less than the most accurate, the most unsparing documentarist or historian of our times. So having said this, I can only hope and expect and be certain that this book finds many, in that sense, endless interlocutors. In that sense, the writing is more than a book. The field of speaking positions, voices, will far outlive the numbers of pages that the book consists in. So with these remarks, let me invite Pradeep to make his first set of remarks. Pradeep. Oh yes, of course, there is that plan. So sorry. So Brahm is meant to make a brief introduction to his book. So yes, absolutely, Brahm. Yeah, absolutely. Waiting to hear from you with bated breath.
First of all, may I request people who are sitting that side, we have enough space this side. If you can come forward, then I think we are going to discuss a lot. We have many questions to ask and many questions to discuss. So So first of all, I would like to thank JNU Academic Forum for organizing this event. JNU Academic Forum, Leftwork, and School of Arts and Aesthetics taking these collective initiatives and organizing this event. And there are so many people, I have senior faculty members here, so when I started writing, then I was not sure whether I had a language to write. Because I was not just writing, it was like writing from the limits of the writing. But trying to articulate, because I have done academic writing before, but this is also a book. In a sense, I would say this is a book where I am doing an experiment with my own writing. So it is an experiment with the writing. That is the way I started, and I started just strange kinds of encounters. So there was a writing newspaper, and they approached me that I should write a column, and then I've written a column, but that column was never published. But that made me realize that I can write. And then this whole journey has started in a quite interesting way, and then with the kinds of comments, encouragement with the colleagues, with the friends, and then this has started taking shape. But also when I started writing for newspaper and popular column, then the whole limit that you have to write in 800 words, you have to write in 1,500 words, and then you are not able to explore the themes that you really wanted to explore the theme in a greater length, and you don't have that kind of space. And this is why you have some section that appeared in some of the social media or forum. But later I tried to again explore those things in this book. And therefore, so there are two ways one can read this book. One, that it is like a book of essays, and that is the way I think of that even if you read this book, then see right that this is a book of essays. But I would also like to see it as a popular, a proper book in the sense that it's a book on curtailment and freedom, and where you find some kinds of connection that goes across the chapter. And I know many of you have not read the book yet, and many of you are reading because it's some kinds of very interesting, generous endorsement that I got for this book, and also with a great illustration by Anupam Rai that gives the first impression of the book. So I think that still I feel that because as you have to read the book, and then I think we can have a more dialogue, and I should be able to get a more feedback and comments from your side. So what is this book about? And that could be like a very fundamental question that one as a reader you will ask that what is this book about? So as I was saying, it's like an experiment, my experimental writing. So it's a lot of writings, different kinds of genre that I'm trying to bring together. So there are poetry, there are dialogue, there are third person, there are first person. And so whatever way I would say that I'm not trained in the grammar. When I was started writing in English, then I'm not a person coming from where with grammar, I was acquainted with the grammar or trained in the grammar. So I don't have that language to write. And then it was also becoming many times limits of writing that how you're going to proceed. So, and book has 8 chapters, and I'm just going to briefly talk about the chapters. So first chapter starts with this whole idea of the breathlessness, and it's called When We Can't Breathe, Living with the Curtailment. Second chapter discusses about words and demagogue, what demagogues do with the words. So we see it is not just attack on the body, it is not just an attack on somebody. We are also seeing the lynching of the words in the very real sense. And then you see that how we have the whole culture is becoming culture of demagogy, in which this chapter talks about. Third chapter discuss about that the whole Muslim hating that has become a kind of bone of our nation. And it is the title says that will you hate him as you hate me. And this I try to take from Mia poetry, and that becomes again a kind of provocation to, and I give my own family journey, that how my own family journey, how we encounter, how my mother perceived the figure of Muslim, how I perceive the figure of Muslim, and then different encounters that I try to bring in this chapter. And then I go to this dance of the migrant laborers because I think, of course, we have a figure of dances in different ways, but I think we are thinking about mobility and mobility and movement. Then no other figure can match the movement of migrant laborers, and the crisis has completely exposed that figure in front of our eyes. So that chapter discusses about the dance of the migrant laborers, both in the sense of hopelessness, but also in the sense of great hope. For example, I say that what happens when migrant workers are started walking back because they are supposed to walk in a line, they are supposed to walk in assembly, they are supposed to work in a particular, they have to work in a particular pattern, But what happens when they start walking back, when they decide that no, they will go back to home, whatever it happens. And then I think that is the risk if migrant laborers were taking, then this was not just a question of like, walking back to home, it was also generating a new kinds of politics that we can talk about. And then I go to the trial of art, and you have poets, artists, and we know that how like many of our artists are still remaining in prison. We have three members of the government; they are still remaining in prison. We had like Barbara, poet who was arrested, and like 8 years person was like the state was making this whole allegation that he was trying to again like attack prime minister. So all these kinds of allegations. So how there is a relationship between a state and artist I discussed, and I discussed through the ontology that it is about the identity of the state and identity of the artist that go against each other. And then I try to bring some idea about like metaphor of art and metaphor of the state that necessarily goes against each other in the time where we also see that like also neoliberal economies are generating different other kinds of artists. And then I move to March of the Masters, and this is the chapter where I discuss about protest, dissent, and curbing of rights. And this is a chapter largely about the farmers' protest. And we know that history, that what happened in the farmers' protest, and how this whole curtailment, this happened in different ways that they were trying to protest and in a very democratic ways, but again their rights were getting curtailed. So that chapter discussed that one. And the new chapter, one chapter that I was seriously thinking about Muna strike. I don't think many of you we have discussed about the significance of Muna strike, but for me, Muna strike moment is a very interesting moment because this was not just a strike against some like workers strike, worker participating in some strike. It was also a strike at a spiritual level. So it becomes two different kinds of a strike. That you are not just striking against some factory, like against some owners or company, like company authorities, but you are also striking against the spiritual authority, and that Yoguna strike becomes quite interesting moment for me, and this chapter discusses that one. And so for the date, the final chapter discusses about the date, mourning and solidarity. And again, on the time of the mourning, I see that mourning is a site where we can find a strong notion of solidarity, and that happens very much in our culture, but also that gives us a lot of like the site where bodies finds new alliances, the bodies finds new kinds of bonding. We share a lot more things than we share in our usual day life, and that is why mourning becomes a very important kind of, I would say, site for me. So this is the structure of the chapter. What I'm going to do, I will just read you a small paragraph to just give you a sense that how I'm trying to do this experiment in writing. And the section is called "We Will Gather Like Bees." In the simplest sense, we is I and you. It is I and you and you and you and you and you. We is the idea of coming together in body and words, in alliances of bodies, in promised words that form a collective. But we is the problem here. Perhaps it is the most fundamental problem of politics. It moves between the possibility and impossibility of marching together. It presents the challenge of coming together. They say a collective is impossible. It is all fractures. It is all fragments. It is all false. It is a futile exercise, and thus it is impossible to build solidarity. But that is the challenge. Of course, there is no easy way out. One has to be suspicious of we when one speaks on your behalf. But we also remind us of our shared humanity, our community, our deep emotion that connect our emotional universe, despite all the fractures and holes. Writers and activists Bell Hooks tells, for across all the differences of race, gender, class, sexuality, religion, was a shared realm of emotional feeling. She says our yearning for peace and justice might serve as a uniting force. She adds that longing of our hearts is tied to the quest for freedom. Yearning for principled resistance and struggle can change our desperate plight, writes Cornel West in her endorsement. Thus, we have to come together. Collective is not a privilege, it is an urge. It is a necessity we cannot escape even if we differ radically. We need to find solidarity from the questions Toni Morrison asked: how people cry, how do they sleep, the sound of silence, the rhythm of body, the color of gown, the qualm of the dust, failure of the movement, faith in the eyes, the conviction of the rebels, keep creating the sense of belonging, of possibility, of the new world. The shared space and feeling of breathlessness and yearning can offer the possibility of common ground where all these differences might meet and engage one another. In the loss of ideas and empiricism, The we becomes our last hope, a witness of our last struggle. It is the principal position in which one asks for solidarity. It is in the positive feeling in which Ambedkar asked for marriage fraternity. Fraternity here is not a feeling of brotherhood, but feeling of fellowship. The term for collective caring that cuts across gender, caste, and race. Solidarity and fraternity are carried through cooperation, collective action, and mutual aid. Collective is not frozen like ice; it flows like a water. Solidarity is not solid like a rock; it is a melting ground of bodies and ideologies. It is not an iron hook from which everyone has to be hanged. It is the gallows that brings bodies together beyond the boundaries for their distance. It is the name of the assembly, alliances, and association. So I will stop it here. Thank you so much, and I know many of my friends are here. They supported me. They really supported. Yes, now, to so much.
Yeah, thank you. Um, well, taking cue from Shomu, that he mentioned that he read the book backwards, but just I think for some little reference. And I'm also going to do that because what I'm going to read is the kind of insight that Brahma has produced, but then it has a very wonderful resonance on the ground. It actually happened in practicality. He tells us to be positive, because we have to stand up to this demagogues and the kind of demagoguery that goes on. So basically, he's talking about that we have to stand up to this curtailment. Without standing up, we can't really survive. Now, interestingly, I'll just read it out, and then I'll come to that live experience, live example that we just recently. I don't know how many of you heard about this. That I'll quote that, but let me first read this out. Life and art often spring from that closure. The greatest love epics could not become possible in feudal societies. Remember the epic of Iranja, the play of Romeo and Juliet, and the ballad of Reshma Chornal. Most beautiful poetry and epics are written against the backdrop of curtailment. Should we accept curtailment? Nobody says so. These stories are a simple but remarkable statement on how life and art do not end in curtailment. Recently, the terror accused Bhatia Thakur apparently took a young Hindu woman to watch this movie, Kerala Spirits, and then the next day she eloped with her Hindu boyfriend, a Muslim boyfriend. So you see, I mean, this example is very instructive in the sense that all this barricading and all this curtailment that we have been experiencing, but there are these interesting examples of young men, and especially from this university, they continue to rise against this curtailment. They continue to literally and figuratively climb on these barricades. And recently, I and Brahma Prakash had this experience that these wrestlers were protesting against, their sexual harassment near India Gate, and then we were literally basically trying to go across the barricades. And I think it is the picture there. So the point I'm trying to make is that there have been these possibilities, despite having had these, constant vilification, constant criminalization of politics, constant creating of democratic spaces, we continue to make our efforts to rise against this kind of barricading. So now I'll start talking about the book. Me and Brahma Prakash write number of books of this kind, and I get invited to this book. This is the second book that I'm discussing of this. So he's a dear friend. Now, this book is full of
points. The kind of metaphor that is invoked, barricading. Freedom has been barricaded. Even during, you know, the COVID pandemic, Muslims' lives were barricaded. They were vilified, and they were described as contingent. Um, they were held responsible for spreading the corona pandemic, the virus, um, and they came to be vilified as if they were responsible for spreading the coronavirus. Now, barricading does not necessarily mean that they're physically barricaded. Of course, Muslims are physically barricaded, Dalits are physically barricaded, but also have been assaulted, brutalized, and killed. Now, physical barricading we can overcome, but the kind of barricading that demagogic spreads, that is something I think we should think about. I mean, of course, there are individual positive stories, but then, the curtailment of freedom, the barricade of freedom, the kind of political discourse that has been spreading, and it is not only acted out in the streets, but also it is embedded in universities. And we have been one of the, perhaps biggest casualties of this kind of unification campaign. We have been called anti-nationals, we have been called urban nationals, but we are also been physically attacked. Okay? So there are various facets that this demography produces. And these facets, therefore, not only remain confined to political spaces, but also spaces of higher education, universities, schools, colleges. You may have recently heard that, the syllabus has been amended, and all that the literature that talks about humanity, that celebrates human struggle, human dignity, has been replaced by another demagogue. I'm talking about Savarkar. Savarkar's books have been included in the syllabus of the Delhi University curriculum. So this kind of barricading of thoughts, this kind of barricading of views, this kind of curtailment of freedom, which is being institutionalized, normalized. Now, Brahma Prakash talks about Una struggle, Una strike. I was quite struck by the word strike. We often use the word strike in the context of industry and factories, and when people declare that they would not like to work, they go on strike. But then, in this informalized space, which is basically governed by some kind of religious sanctioning, Sanatani mindset, sometimes religious orthodoxy. But when Dalits themselves decided to go on strike, and they effectively, basically, politicized the issues, and although they did not really succeed, and I think Brahma Prakash also points this out, that there are these various struggles that, whether it is struggle against Shine Back struggle against CNR, NRC imposition, or Una struggle or struggle against the struggle to say this, things like that. So you also notices that these struggles are fragmented. Okay, and that is why perhaps the language of treatment, the language of barricading is we see every now and then. But there are interesting snippets here. There are his own examples of this, that how our minds have been basically infected, influenced, affected by the kind of communalizing discourse. The situation has become very normal. It's not about political activists of a particular political regime going and lynching Muslims or Dalits, but even common individuals also, it seems, succumb to this kind of ineffective programs. That is something which is very worrying. So in this sense, barricading and curtailment, these are not physical objects. course, physical objects. You can see here, in front of the administration building, that there are these, barricades that are lying there. So, but this also suggests that powers that be are quite fearful. But there is it wields power, the regime wields power, and therefore, it is beginning all these humanizing interventions. It is basically on the contrary, on the path of humanizing everyone that tries to exist. So, in that sense, this language, this metaphorical language of barricading, treatment, I think makes a lot of sense and has a great deal of resonance. Um, so these metaphors also um, sound academically, politically very, very significant because um, the kind of reality to this book that Brahma Prakash is trying to tell us, for example, even migrant laborers, in the manner in which um, their lives have been barricaded. They were basically grown up in the cities. They walked, hundreds of miles. There was this very interesting, but at the same time extremely poignant story of a young daughter who cycled all the way to Bihar. So you have these kind of stories that people were basically run over by trucks, by trains, because they were taking, they were walking along the railroads because they probably thought that they would get lost. And they were run over by trucks, they were run over by trains, and they died. And then they were also subjected to extremely cruel treatment. They were showered with disinfectants because they were believed to be carriers of the coronavirus. Now, these people who constructed our cities, constructed our cities, were treated in this manner. And they were also responsible. They were looked at as, he quotes one of the BJP politicians, that why did not these migrants in the cities, why did they have to walk? If they walk, then they are spreading the potential contagions. I mean, these kinds of curtailment, these kind of barricading, we don't really talk about. So, this book, very influential, bring these issues now in the public domain. Not that we have forgotten about it, not that we don't really talk about them, but then um, this barricading and what basically what I'm worried about is this that it seems that this barricading and curtailing has become a kind of institutionally accepted practice. It has become a kind of governance practice. Hmm? The state would want you to sleep. The state would want you to not to rise against this barricading. Muslims and Dalits and even migrant workers experience this barricading so severely, and they continue to. Now, apart from these these barricades, but behind these barricades, behind these settlements, also lie words, demagogy. The constant invocation of this polarizing discourse. Once you have Muslims accused of spreading um, coronavirus, before that you had Dalits who had been accused of stealing cows, and then they were publicly flogged. These are not isolated instances. It would seem that somebody from somewhere running the script. We were political activists, balladeers, people who took it upon themselves by taking incredible amount of risks by inviting states off. When they tried to organize public rallies celebrating, the struggle, especially in the context of Viva Correa, they had been accused of plotting the killing of the Prime Minister. Now, these are not really accusations, but these accusations also have ended up arresting people for years on flimsy grounds. But people have been seriously accused of fomenting trouble. People have been accused of, accused of carrying out terrorist activities on the other side of the fence, barricading, continuing to enjoy freedom. And I just gave that example. And now this barricading backfire. With that example of the young Hindu woman who was with her Muslim boyfriend. So, so we have to basically seriously think that words have serious consequences. The kind of words that are uttered, and the kind of not only words being spoken in the public domain through media, through various media channels, the kind of narrative that is set by the regimes that speak. But these words basically, curtail people's freedom. And the kind of language in these, that the police investigating serious, so-called serious accusations against section of people. Two of our students are languishing in jail. The kind of language that is used by the police, do you really think the police is capable of writing this kind of charge sheets? Thousands of pages of charge sheets have been written by police. So where do these words come from? There is a trajectory that basically runs through all these spaces: politics, religion, society. We can't, of course, media has played a very vicious role in this. But then, media also appears to have been barricaded. Now, where is the hope? Hope also appears to be quite fragmentary. Even if it's fragmentary, but these fragments also raise or give us a lot of hopes. Whether these fragments will one day collectively rise against the regime that we rise against the barricading, rise against the curtailment of freedom, Brahma Prakash doesn't take a very open position. There is vibrancy of political struggles in this country. Every now and then we see people rising against this regime. But it seems that there is no consensus. There is no consensus that we should, collectively rise against this throttling of our freedom, against the suppression of our freedom. That also reflects our political leadership. So what to do? We have to continually rise against our oppression or suppression. We have to have this, fellow meeting that Ambedkar spoke about. But it would also seem that whether we would be able to rise these caste boundaries that we have. Because these struggles are, Child caste struggle was only for Muslims, only by Muslims. Bhima Koreka is only by, Dalits. Pune struggle was only led by Dalits. But that's the impression that, prevails in the society. So perhaps, we still have to rise against these kinds of, primordial values, caste, religion, gender, for example. Uh, so women are being basically banned from approaching certain religious spaces. Recently, there is a pronouncement in the state of Uttarakhand that there is a percentage of how much percentage of clothes women should wear before they enter the temple. 80% or 70% or something, some kind of ridiculous thing. Huh? 80%. If you are not 80% dressed, then you are not allowed to enter these spaces. Before that, we had Shabrimala episode. Now, this curtailment is not, I mean, it's cultural, it is religious, it is political. So, religion is basically at the driving seat. Religion basically drives our thinking. We may not accept this, but that is what has been happening. The recent spectacle, that same old spectacle. What was that all about? You don't invite the president of the country. Perhaps she did not fit the bill because of the social background. So these kind of barricading, it's been normalized. It's become a kind of common sense, which is very uncommon. But then it's been accepted. So barricading at this point of time, I mean, curtailment of freedom, barricading those spaces where we can't really, we can't really protest, we can't really resist. If you resist, then you face lathi charge, you face court cases, you face charge sheets, physical violence you have to go through. Apart from that, then you are also subjected to legal scrutiny. You are constantly under surveillance. All this book is full of these. The book has been written with very eclectic approach. You have, people from all background, Ambedkar, Marx together. You have Zizek, you have Namdev Basal, you have, you have Kabir. So, in that sense, it's very eclectic. You have Mukti Bodh. And in that sense, I find it very eclectic. But the situation is such that you can't really rely upon one or two theoretical approaches. I think that's one of the concerns that Brahma Prakash has faced. But then, politically, this kind of approach has serious limitations. You have caste and class existing together, but not being able to breach this barricade. Now, whether social reality guides how we should write is one thing. Another thing is that whether our work should produce hope, the literature of hope. Brahma Prakash is basically he's trying to be realistic, but at the same time, he has not completely abandoned the politics of hope. But then this hope is fragmented. Another problem this is not a problem, but this the celebratory approach towards words. I would go for meaning because words could be deceptive. When you actually words exist in books, in dictionaries, in literature, of various kinds. But actually, how words reflect on the ground, the kind of meaning that they give, I think for me um, that would be more important than you know um, separating words. Their sociological significance. Words tend to be abstract, but how they reflect on ground, whether they actually capture the reality. I mean, Brahma Prakash has tried to do that. But the kind of meaning that you would normally expect. I mean, let me give this example of, say, for example, Devdasi. The word Devdasi exists in religious discourse. Sounds great, Devdasi. But then actually what happens to Devdasis? The kind of sexual exploitation that they are subjected to. So there is a great chasm between, there is a great gap between words and meaning. So this may sound a bit abstract, but sociologically speaking, I would, I would, I would, I would look for, I would rather use meaning. Uh, Wittgenstein spoke about use as meaning, the kind of the way we use word that gives us meaning. Um, so that is how I differentiate between word and meaning. Um, it's a very thought-provoking book. Um, all chapters basically, you know, um, um, all chapters talk about violence, of course, resistance also, um, curtailment, barricading, um, curtailment as um, physically experienced, but at the same time, the curtailment of our thoughts. Because when you are bombarded with one-sided political discourse, you don't really think about anything. We are talking, we intellectuals understand, we people who read and go to colleges and universities understand that. But common man wouldn't. The kind of political narrative that he is bombarded, he or she is bombarded with, is very different. So that curtailment, and as I pointed out, that this curtailment is also introduced in spaces now. People of particular kind of political ideology have been appointed. Why? Okay. So we have these serious questions, and this book raises these questions by talking about concrete instances, farmer struggle, democratic struggle, how Muslims have been treated during the COVID pandemic, and how we, as common human beings, talking about his, he gives his own mother's example, that uh, people don't really realize. We, on the one hand, talk. I mean, our neighbors are Muslims, but at the same time, somehow we also can be repeatedly given to that discourse. No, but they are like that. So this barricading of mind is, I think, should seriously be thought about. I think I've exhausted my time, and I may not have been very well organized, but then I thought that this is how I have to present. So thank you very much.